What can landlords and investors look forward to? Not very much, but they're going to have to get to grips with it. Government are saying landlords should just suck up being effectively a year and a half down in terms of rent. And this is what ministers have to be very careful about. Investors have a choice. It's the abolition of the fixed term tenancy. It's the end of Section 21. It is a fault-based reason for possession. 4.7 million tenancy agreements will need to be updated overnight. We can disagree really strongly about the direction of travel, but it is going to happen. So you either get on the bus and do it properly, or you think about doing something different. I've not mentioned this yet. The only way you'll be able to increase the rent is by...
Welcome to another episode of the Property Developer Show, the podcast. Today, we are joined by Ben Beadle from the NRLA, the CEO. We're going to get the lowdown today of the Renters' Right Act and everything that's going on internally from your perspective.
Yeah, so there's kind of a lot to unpack, a lot going on. A lot has happened in the past couple of weeks. So as you rightly observe, it is an act. We're not talking about a bill now. The time for carping is over. We've been fighting very, very hard. A lot of it has fallen on deaf ears, unfortunately. But what can landlords and investors look forward to? Well, not very much, but they're going to have to get to grips with it. So it's the abolition of the fixed term tenancy. It's the end of Section 21. It is a fault-based reason for possession. So you need to have a reason if you need to get your property back, which frankly, most people do anyway. You don't go around evicting people willy-nilly. And then you've got things like greater notice periods as well. And I think it's, for me, that those sort of tenancy changes, they're the first strand. I think for a lot of people, that abolition of the fixed term is going to be something to really adjust to. So tenants will be able to move in and effectively give 2 months notice on the day that they move in. No reason they should, of course, but obviously it gives renters a lot more mobility. It also gives them a lot more security because they don't have to worry about Section 21 hanging over their head. As a landlord, you need to have a valid reason. Now, that reason could be moving back in, selling the property, antisocial behaviour or rent arrears, but you do need to have a reason. And I think it's going to be a big change. It's certainly the biggest change that we will have seen for 30, 40 years easily.
How can landlords prepare for this?
Well, it's coming. We don't know exactly when, but I think making sure that they have an assessment of their portfolio before these things are removed and change is probably a good thing to be doing. Getting on some training, listening to some of our free webinars about how best to prepare. But as I say, now the battleground is around implementation. So 4.7 million tenancy agreements will need to be updated overnight. So it's right, and we've been making that case, that the minister gives the sector sufficient time to be able to prepare for this. Now, we're asking for a minimum of 6 months from when the regulations are laid. But all we know for now is that it won't be before Christmas. So it's anyone's guess. And we've made strong representations to the Secretary of State and the Housing Minister, who I was with a couple of weeks or so ago, where we were talking about exactly the things that people are going to be needing to do. And of course, it's not just landlords getting ready for it. It's legal practitioners, lawyers, local authorities, councils. There's so much preparedness that needs to take place. And of course, if ministers are serious about making a success of these things, they will give the sector time. And that's what we're pushing for.
I know, obviously, you said a few of the points that you were trying to raise with the ministers has fallen on deaf ear. Are they listening to any sort of landlord perspective? Are they considering anything from that sort of regard? Or is this very much heavily policy driven, trying to gain voters? It's not... It almost seems like the landlord bashing kind of avoidance. Yeah,
so I mean, Labour were elected on a manifesto to decisively level the playing field between landlord and renter. Ministers are very much of the view that things are too much in the landlord's favour. I would take issue with that, but that's how they see the world. And they've come into power and they've done it roughly within a year of coming into power. So I wouldn't criticise them for doing something they didn't set out to do. They've done exactly what it says on the tin. In the manifesto, and Matthew Pennycook, the housing minister, has absolutely driven it through. And so, whilst we've been in the room and had many discussions with officials and the minister and the Secretary of State, they're approaching this thing from the point of view that that's how they want to, level up. They want to level that playing field. So things like making representations around student tenancies, for example, which will be severely affected by the abolition of the fixed term, they're not interested. They know what the downsides are going to be. And that's in my view, a calculated decision that they have gone for, that if it causes a bit of disruption, c'est la vie. Similarly, with the wider abolition of the fixed term, similarly with giving additional notice. So, for example, one of the things, and we think that this sends the wrong message, but one of the changes is that under the current regime, if you use a Section 8 notice, which is an alternative to Section 21, you can give a notice for serious rent arrears. That notice currently is 14 days, and you have to be at least 2 months in arrears. Under the new plans, you have to be at least 3 months in arrears, and a landlord has to give a month's notice. So that means that landlords will be 4 months down before they can even think about joining the queue of the county court system, which typically takes a year. Now, we're very worried about that because it sends the wrong message that, frankly, that tenancy is already broken down. There's no chance of getting any rent back. But government are saying, actually, it's kind of okay. Landlords should just suck up being effectively a year and a half down in terms of rent. What message does that send to investors in terms of appetite? That's something that guys and girls out there are going to need. If they hit a bad tenant, they're going to need to be able to, pay their mortgage for a year and a half without any rent coming in. That's a dramatic change. You should always have some in your war chest for when the proverbial hits the fan. But that's a tall order by any stretch. So that's just one example of some of the very significant changes that we're going to see that the minister says will decisively level up. I don't think it levels up in the right sort of way. I'm old-fashioned. I think if you enter into a commitment to say you're going to do something, you should do it. And if you don't do it, you face the consequences of not doing it. But in this instance, the law is not in favour of the victim. It feels to be in favour of the perpetrator, and I say that is not the right balance.
And that's the Property Developer Show 2025 wrapped up. Across 5 shows, we've had over 2,000 visitors, 199 exhibitors, which is quite frustrating because we're one off 200, and 50 keynote speakers. If you missed out this year, we will be back bigger and better in 2026. We will be visiting 6 locations, starting in Bristol, then London, Southampton, Birmingham, Manchester, and finally ending in Leeds again. Register your interest on the website link in the episode description and be the first to hear when tickets go on sale. And I look forward to seeing you in the new year. One of the trickiest parts of running a successful property business is staying on top of your finance. From contractor payments to project costs, the numbers can get messy fast. That's why we've partnered with Tide. Tide is a smarter way to manage your business finance, whether you're flipping houses, managing a rental portfolio, or scaling your property company. With Tide, you can open a free business account in minutes, no hidden fees, send professional invoices and payment links, accept card payments in person or online, track expenses, and set aside tax automatically, all within the app. You can even add an expense card for your team as you grow. It's fast, clean, and built for the way property professionals work. And here's the kicker. Open a Tide account with our code PDS and spend just £100 and you'll get £50 cash back. Further information on how you can sign up in the episode description. T's and C's apply. Do you feel, I know when we first met, I asked you the question, what are ministers' outlook on landlords? And you said generally not positive. But to me, it seems like because a lot of ministers are landlords themselves.
Indeed, yes. Well, we've seen, a number of misdemeanors in recent weeks and months of a number of landlords that have got it wrong, including the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's overlooked getting a license, something, that will be punishable with a significant fine and a rent repayment order, which coincidentally will be doubled under this new act from 12 months to 24 months. So, very much a case of, do as I say, not as I do. And of course, we could go on with stamp duty with the former Deputy Prime Minister jacking up the rent and serving a Section 21 notice and generally appalling standards. So, yes, there are a number of MPs and ministers that are landlords. But as I say, Labour have re-election in mind. There are significantly more renters than there are landlords, and they want to deliver these reforms, which will be once in a generation, and they hope that they will get elected off the back of it. Now, my own view is I think most landlords can adjust to these changes if they want to. I gave evidence to a select committee last week, actually, where I was making the point that I don't think landlords will necessarily look at the entirety of the Renters' Rights Act and say, I'm off. But they'll look at some elements of the Renters' Rights Act. They will look at minimum energy efficiency standards. They'll look at sort of tax changes that have happened under previous administrations. They'll look ahead to making tax digital that comes in from next year. And they will look at sort of the rhetoric, in political circles of how they are perceived. And then they may think, actually, I might go and do something that's a bit more worthwhile or derives a greater reward. And of course, if you're then factoring in some real risky changes, I guess, like, serious rent arrears racking up, waiting a year to have your case heard by a court and things like that, you're also going to be far more risk averse, I think. Even in my own position, you meet tenants and you think, oh, well, they're maybe on the cusp of affordability. But you meet them, seem all right, take a bit of a punt, normally get it right. I think there'll be fewer landlords that will be doing that sort of thing because they would be worried about the repercussions. And I think that has knock-on impacts as well, because we see with these changes, things like bidding wars being banned, not collecting rent in advance. So you can't ask for 6 or 12 months rent up front. You can't ask for a greater deposit if you've got a pet. You kind of got to have to accept a pet unless you've got a good reason not to. So what you're going to do, I suspect that you're going to be turning people down and waiting for not quite the perfect tenant, but not taking the first one that comes along. And I think landlords will always have that luxury. It's one of the saving graces. At the moment, we've got 11 people chasing every available rental property. So demand is still very strong. Supply remains fairly weak. And until the environment is a more palatable one for investment, I think it's always going to be that way.
Do you think ministers are considering that? Because, I mean, if you look at it from a, I suppose, supply and demand perspective, the shift in the market going from, accidental landlords to more professional market. Obviously, I read an article yesterday that I think Lloyd's Living are at 7,500 units and I think on target for 10,000 in the next 12 months. That's obviously a massive recent shift since 2021 that all of this seems to be ramping up. Section 24, potential whisper of national insurance on landlords, all of these various things, and what that is, the impact that that's going to have on the rental market. Obviously, we're seeing the long tail effects of that at the moment, and particularly through COVID when people were queuing for viewings. Are ministers really considering that side of the more regulation, the lack of supply? What are their kind of thought platters on that?
Well, I can tell you, Matthew Pennycook is very much of the view that if a few landlords do choose to exit the sector, that may not be a bad thing. I say be careful what you wish for, because you're not going to hit your 1.5 million social homes being built. And as I said last week at Select Committee, somebody said, I forget who it was, that Section 21 is the leading cause of homelessness. No, it's not. Landlord selling is. So if you haven't got that kind of supply of all tenures, whether that's social or private rented, doesn't matter how many you build on social. If the private rented sector does go into regression, then that's going to be problematic for renters. It will translate into higher rents. I'm certain about that, because it's a straightforward supply and demand kind of challenge, isn't it? The less you have of something and the more somebody wants it, the more it's going to cost. So for those folk that are in it for the longer term, I think you can adjust to these changes, and I think your rents will probably go up. But if you do hit some problems along the way, that's where you have to be careful. So I think a couple of tips here. You've got to be absolutely shit hot on your referencing. Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, of course.
Good. Okay, good. Well, too late. I've done it now. But you've got to be absolutely on the money when it comes to referencing, because you if you're going to end up waiting a year to get possession of your property with an extended notice on top, that's going to hit you in the pocket. So I think you're going to be much more choosy about the people that you accept, and those that are on the margins, those that are from overseas, those that have got dodgy credit, those that can't prove their history. I think they might fall by the wayside.
Looking more from your kind of involvement with the kind of the Renters' Right Act, and what sort of impact the NRLA have, because you're the spokesperson for the landlords. What sort of messages have you managed to get across, and what have you been unsuccessful at sort of getting across?
Well, I think when it comes to renters' rights, we would have much preferred a rental reform, which was the conservative version of the renters' rights policy. Unfortunately, we haven't got that. So any concessions are few and far between. And that's done deliberately. It's done because the minister has been very clear that, looking after landlords is not something that, that fits with their agenda. It's not going to get them elected. So in terms of any sort of concessions, one of the things that we have been successful on is that there is a runoff period for existing Section 21s. So you've kind of got to use it or lose it. If you've got one that's straddling the implementation, which we think will be in sort of 3 to 6 months' time, you've got a 3-month runoff period to be able to take that matter to court. So that is something. The minister has also given himself some wiggle room around increasing rent. So one of the, and I've not mentioned this yet. So because the fixed terms being abolished, the only way you'll be able to increase the rent is by serving a Section 13 notice. So increasing the rent on a periodic tenancy. You can only do that once. It's subject to 2 months' notice. And as it is at the moment, a tenant can challenge that by going to the first tier tribunal. Now, the minister's been very clear. He wants more tenants to challenge the rent, unfair rents. So firstly, landlords are going to have to, be very, very good with their soft skills in terms of explaining why they're putting the rent up rather than just chucking a notice through the letterbox. But what the first tier tribunal does is that's a free service. So, I'm very worried that renters, there's no kind of, barrier to challenging your rent. So we think that's going to block up quite quickly. What the minister has done is given himself a little bit of wriggle room about firstly trying to have a mechanism to assess whether the rent that's being proposed is likely to be overturned or not. So by using some existing data sources for rents. But the other thing, and this is one thing that we're very concerned about, is that new rent and the first tier tribunal can only give a landlord what they ask for or lower. They can't give you more than what you ask for. That new rent will only apply from the date of the hearing. It won't apply from the expiry of the notice. Right. So, that's not rent control, but it's certainly rent suppression. If it does take a significant time to be able to get it heard, then a landlord's going to be losing out on that. But the minister has given himself a little bit of wiggle room to protect the first tier tribunal from getting overwhelmed, and he can alter when that new rent kicks in from. Right. So, as I say, it's few and far between. We have got a ground for student tenancies, but that ground, in my view, is largely unworkable in as much as a student landlord, I don't have an issue with getting tenants out. I have an issue with them not clearing off too early or too late, so that it doesn't preclude me from finding a new tenant. So that ground is only applicable to HMOs, and it can't be relied upon if it's issued 6 months. If a tenancy starts kind of 6 months early. So they want to kind of limit how far this mad rush of student tenancies takes place. So yeah, a number of small concessions, but let's be clear. This isn't an act we would have written ourselves. More's the pity.
Yeah, of course. Obviously, there's going to be a massive impact on the student market in a sense of, if someone is living in a purpose-built service student accommodation and they make friends in freshers, and they've got a spare bedroom, 2 months notice, moved out into their friends, or vice versa, whichever way around it is. Obviously that's going to impact because to find a student to fill that space midterm is going to be next to impossible.
Indeed. And it's worth pointing out, as you say, the purpose-built student accommodation sector can run with their licenses. So you kind of got a two-tiered system between PBSA and sort of on-street student housing, which is completely different. You've also got the kind of upheaval with predictability. So whilst a landlord is not going to be able to predict when their property is going to be coming available because they don't know when these people are going to leave, similarly, people that are coming in who want to secure a tenancy before they clear off for the summer aren't going to be able to do that either. So I really do think it's going to throw sort of the student sector into a great deal of turmoil. And actually, one of the things we know that I have got a few student properties that I rent, so predominantly a student landlord. I've actually ventured into supported living, where I can get a 3 or 5 year fixed term. We've got a great supplier called Living Redefined that have sourced me some tenants, a housing charity who place homeless people. I'm getting as much rent as I was previously, and I don't have to worry about some elements of repairs. I don't have to worry about it being empty, and it will be reinstated in the condition that I find it. Obviously, there's loads of variables within that, but I think it will make people look at their portfolios and think, actually, is the student market for me? Do I need to do something a bit different? And this is what ministers have to be very careful about. Investors have a choice. They have the choice whether to stay. They have the choice whether to go. They also have the choice whether to do something completely different with that property. And so I do think, whilst we're kind of between royal assent and implementation, I'd be urging landlords to be taking a really close look at their portfolios, what's performing, what's not. Do you need a rent increase, whatever? I'm taking a really kind of hard-nosed business decision about the long-term viability of that asset.
I think the most frustrating part for landlords and most people that understand the market capacity is that actually the people that are going to be impacted the most are the renters.
Yes, that's right.
Because it's going to be rent increases, lack of available stock, because people, like you say, are looking to pivot into service accommodation, social housing, areas that are less risky and less volatile to this regulation and just constant battering of trying to improve the sector, but in fact actually
make it worse.
Yeah.
I do think there will be some improvements. Some of the things that we've not spoken about are like a decent home standard, AWAB's law, an ombudsman. These are all things that will come later. So you kind of got the tenancy changes first, but you've got some other things that will come down the track. I do think that those will improve the properties that are left. But the emphasis is on what's left, I think. And I think ministers accept that, if it has a small impact on overall supply and some highly leveraged landlords choose to leave the sector, I don't think they'll be shedding any tears. But as I say, and I've reminded them repeatedly, you do have to balance things very carefully. They've chosen not to, in my view, take a sort of a very hard approach to these things, and they have to face the consequences. I do think the market will adjust. I do think that investors will be able to come to terms with these things. But as I keep reminding people, investors have a choice, and it's whether or not they want to make that choice. No one's going to force them to.
So as a landlord yourself then, and maybe what the kind of not incentive, but what the message is from the NRLA, how can people position themselves looking at a 5-year kind of plan? What sort of things are you considering as a landlord, or you're seeing those really great landlords? What are they doing to, I suppose, maneuver through this constant change?
Yeah, I think it's about knowing what's coming, being really at peace with, or as far as you can be at peace with the changes that are coming, seeing what impact those changes will likely have on your portfolio. And people have got different assets, different tenant classes and things like that. And it will mean different things to different people. But it's then about preparedness. So, having done that review, there's no point waiting for the new world if you are kind of, significantly below market value. At the same time, I wouldn't advocate going out and trying to bring it up to market value in one big, foul swoop. We've got to be fair to people. But having a conversation with your tenant, if a rent review is appropriate, is probably now is a good time to think about doing that. And making sure that you are set up for the longer term. I think some of the other things in the Act is greater powers for local authorities and far more punitive fines. So you can't kind of bugger about and wing it. So the conference that we ran last week here in Liverpool, great turnout, but people were looking for solutions. People know what's coming. Okay, well, how can I protect myself against this new regime? I don't want to get a fine. I want to stay in the sector. Maybe I will diversify a little bit, but I need software. I need to be able to track my compliance dates. I need to know what the licensing rules are in my area. I need to not rely on my agent to give me bum advice when it comes to licensing, as we've seen in recent weeks. A landlord is always liable. End of story, whether you sub it out to an agent or not. So now is the time to really get a grip of your portfolio and do things properly. The day of the eager amateur kind of, ballsing it up and getting away with it, I really think is over, because they're going to hit you in the pocket. And it's difficult to have sympathy when people get it wrong, because we're a business and we have to get it right. So we can disagree really strongly about the direction of travel, but it is going to happen. So you either get on the bus and do it properly, or you think about doing something different. And that's really where NRLA comes in. Yes, of course, we wish that there were things in this bill were different, but they're not. So now it's about preparedness. It's about making sure your tenancy agreements are robust, making sure your processes are robust, making sure you've got, get rid of your spreadsheet and get a piece of software that's going to track your rents and track your compliance dates and your license renewals and things like that. And of course, you've got making tax digital, which we've not sort of touched on, but that starts in April. So all the more reason to be, doing things properly.
Yeah. I think it is particularly as I've been in the industry. I mean, I've been purchased my first property 5 years ago, and even then, the kind of, I suppose, evolution that I've been a part of. I mean, it was, if you spoke to old school landlords, they would have been like, "Oh, there's no money in property anymore."
No.
When I was starting out, but I, still made money and became a successful landlord. But the kind of Section 24 that obviously came, there's been so much shift, and the kind of traditional accidental landlord obviously is just completely left the market with most regards. Do you think now, obviously I mentioned Lloyd's Living, 7,500, Legal and General, big landlords, all the private equity that seems to be coming over to the UK as well. Is that maybe playing into the back of people's minds in terms of ministers, and they're seeing this shift in the market? Is that a positive for tenants?
Well, it depends whether you want sort of a faceless company as your landlord. Now, one of the things, and I don't knock them, by the way. In my previous world, I used to work with many institutional clients. In fact, I used to manage those 2 blocks at the Kill, just opposite.
Okay. Yeah.
Big build to rent blocks. So there's a role for all types of landlords. I wouldn't knock them. What we know is that actually you have a better relationship renting from a private individual. You actually have a better relationship at working directly with a landlord than you do a letting agent. That's not to throw shade on agents, but that's what government statistics say time and time again. So I think there's room for everybody. We're in the middle of a housing crisis, and we've been in the middle of a housing crisis for some time. It doesn't seem to be going away, and I can't see that it's going to get any better with these changes. So, as you say, when you invested, there were people telling you it wasn't worth doing. Well, there's people still investing and coming into the market that see Section 21 going. They see the direction of travel on energy. They see they want to digitalize the tax system, and they're still investing. They can't be wrong. So maybe for us, it feels like a downward trend, but we know that property is a good investment, and I suspect that government has kind of got an inkling around that. And with the wider challenges, and we'll see in the budget later this month, we're short of a few quid, and maybe property is going to take the brunt of it. Who knows? So I think that's where government's thoughts are. I don't really harbour any concerns, to be honest with you, with institutional investment. As I said at my conference last week, institutional investment makes my properties look cheap.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way you've got to look at it, isn't it, I suppose? And when, I guess, you look at it from holistic perspective, people that are entering the market now, they've not known anything different other than to operate at the capacity that is required today, not yesterday, today. And I think when you sort of capture that mindset, it's very much an adaptable thing, because, what do they know that is any different from, when they were invested? I'm talking about the old school landlords, when it was deregulated, there wasn't much, it was really passive probably back, 20 years ago. Whereas today, it's just not that type of environment to operate in. So I suppose it's all about adapting to that level that exists.
Yeah.
And not using excuses of X, Y, and Z. It's just very much, okay, what do I need to shift? What do I need to change? What do I need to implement and educate myself on?
100%.
And then continue on that trajectory.
I agree. And I think, when you look at institutional investment, the one thing that those folks do very well is there's almost no emotion attached, right? As an individual, we're emotionally invested in our homes, in our properties. And I am too. And I'm sure you are. But actually, we kind of need to remove that emotional attachment. Landlords are getting het up about pets. Well, institutional landlords have come to terms with that a long time ago, recognise it's a good thing. And okay, yes, I'd like there to be a higher deposit. Yes, I wish the government hadn't changed its mind on insurance. But do you know what? If people make an application and they've got a pet and the property's suitable, well, maybe they'll stay a little bit longer. So, I think there are things that as individuals we can learn from that sort of institutional investment about how they go about and manage their assets and approach their property business. And I just think that individuals are going to be far more kind of bullish and strategic about what they're doing rather than so emotionally invested. You see it on these dreadful TV shows, don't you? And I understand why that is, and I know it's easier said than done. But this is a business, and you've got to treat it like a business.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I suppose, and I only really speak on my own regard this, but I think the frustrating part is it just feels like landlords have been just kicked and bashed in every direction over the last few years, rightly or wrongly. In some cases, obviously, some of the changes are positive, and I think there's no doubt that everyone will agree, particularly the landlords and professionals that I know in the market, that actually the sort of the landlords that we want to squeeze out, we hope that this does squeeze them out in some fast, quick capacity, because they're the ones that give the general good landlords the bad name, because that then forms a part of the societal change and influence on policy and everything else that sort of comes with that. So anyone you'd speak to who is a good landlord would agree in any capacity that if it improves the standard of stock, fine, we're happy with that.
But I think the difficulty is that you see in our sort of politics a deliberate tarnishing of the same brush. You've only got to look at Jack Palahniuk, leader of the Green Party, who wants to abolish landlords.
Yeah.
I mean, what a load of bollocks.
Yeah.
And actually his policy doesn't quite say that. What it says, that's the headline. What it says is we want to grow social housing. We want to regulate the sector. We want rent control. We want all of these things. There will still be landlords. We mustn't forget that we're a nation of kind of, homeowners. We don't have that kind of, I know you're talking about institutional ownership, but 94% of property in the UK is owned by an individual. We don't quite have the same composition as somewhere like France or Germany, which has a far bigger institutional investment. So for me, it will take, that's not a helpful comment. It's just, it's a nonsense comment. And actually, if it was, if you substituted landlord with any other type of person, it'd actually be quite offensive. Yeah. But he's not going to abolish landlords. And actually, I was very pleased to see Steve Reed, the housing secretary, over the weekend, call these ideas wacky. Where would people live? There's a whole kind of debate to sort of play out there. But if you're a responsible landlord, you look after your tenants, you treat people fairly, you do your upkeep, you do your maintenance, I think there's a place for you. And there always will be a place, as long as it suits your kind of business investment, what you're there to do.
Of course, yeah.
And that's the piece that I keep reminding government that people do have that choice. But this sort of deliberate tarnishing of landlords as being, some sort of grifter is just bullshit of the highest order, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, particularly on our TikTok, we get a lot of comments, anti-landlord, landlord bashing, and most of the time when you actually drill down, people don't know why they hate landlords. They just hate them because that's a general ethos of
because everybody else does. I think, unfortunately, there's quite a lot. When you go to dinner parties, I tend to just say I work at Waitrose on the cheese counter rather than anywhere else. But people have always got a story about a landlord that's done something that they shouldn't have done. So in some respects, we've not helped ourselves. I get that. And you're right, kind of squeezing out the bad landlords is something that we absolutely want to do. And the vast majority of landlords, good people, look after their tenants, but it doesn't feel that way in kind of media circles. No. What we can't do is jump up and down every time Shelter or Jack Palahniuk say something slightly controversial. We've got to keep making the argument for responsible landlording. Otherwise, you place too much weight on what those folk are saying, and it's not helpful. The fact of the matter is, this country needs investment. The only way we're going to grow our way out of the hole that we're in is by incentivizing investment. Now, that could be for big institutions, it could be for individuals. Unfortunately, the way that it's going, it looks as though that we're all going to be taxed to oblivion. And that really, really doesn't help things. Doesn't help anybody, in fact.
No, I agree. I mean, I think the troubling factor is, people almost forget that COVID happened and we had this massive quantity of ease that had to be paid for somewhere. And I think that's obviously now the impact that, we've got a massively inflationary period that has obviously been since post-COVID. The fact that we've had slow economic growth because of that, wages haven't kept in line with inflation, property prices also haven't kept in line with inflation. There's a lot of things that
you might throw Brexit in, even.
Brexit, the Ukraine-Russia war, there's
political
been
uncertainty, the whole shebang. We've had
everything.
We've had everything, haven't we?
Absolutely.
The one thing to remember with COVID, you talk about landlords having a bad name. We did a great piece of research that showed that 80% of renters where they asked for something from their landlord, whether that was to end the tenancy, write off rent, payment terms, or whatever, got the help that they needed. We're very slow to remember those.
I'm part of that
types
statistic.
Of things.
I had a tenant working in McDonald's and lost their job, and I said, "Don't worry about the rent" for a couple of months, and then ended up obviously going back under the I can't remember, back to work scenario because doing the takeaways and stuff.
Yeah,
and so yeah, I mean, I didn't bat an eyelid. For me, it was like, yeah, fine, don't worry, catch up when you can, type of thing. And I'm not an anomaly. That's obviously 80% of landlords.
100%. And you've only got to look at things like resettlement schemes. So when there was political uncertainty in Hong Kong, and people coming from Ukraine as well, what did they do? They put out a plea, for landlords to make their homes available for, I forget what fee it was, but to have a room available and stuff like that. We're incredibly reliant on goodwill, but I do have some, I guess, degree of sympathy, really, that all of that has happened, and I mentioned that that people seem to have lots of stories about their landlord or a bad experience and things like that. I mean, I'd hate to be sort of 18 or 19 now. I know it's a surprise to you to know that I'm not, given my youthful looks, but if I was sort of, I don't know, coming out of university or looking for a job and then looking at sort of house prices and getting frustrated by high rents, I'd probably feel a bit aggrieved if my landlord had, a dozen properties. I can understand that sort of angst. Now, I wouldn't be deliberately horrible, but you can understand that sort of, frustration that's out there, and you see that sort of playing out time and time again. And then, added to bad stories and nasty stories and things like that, and kind of divisiveness in our media and politics, it makes for a real kind of culture war, to be honest with you.
Absolutely, 1,000,000%, and a lot of misinformation and lack of understanding. I mean, the amount of comments that I've seen, if landlords just sold all their stock, there'd be enough stock for, and various stuff along those lines. And you think, if you actually understood the economics that go behind that, and what, if we were to change every landlord-owned property to social housing, the government simply wouldn't have enough money to do that, full stop. So we need the private rented sector to enable, people to get on the housing ladder, to create freedom in their own life, to start a family, and having that stepping stone into then. And I'm saying this as a millennial, I was born in 1996. If people really set their mind on buying a property, you can, without a doubt.
Quite. And
I still buy Starbucks and Costa and whatnot, and eat avocado. So
yeah, there we go. Well, I'm a geriatric millennial, born in 1981. I would share that view, but I am, in my old age, increasingly sort of more understanding of how it must feel to be so frustrated,
absolutely,
by sort of living conditions, particularly when you see others take priority on social housing and with all of the uncertainty that's out there, it does all dial back to supply. And this isn't a kind of a pop at Labour. This is multiple governments that have failed, to reverse sort of the impact of flogging off social accommodation, becoming increasingly reliant on the private rented sector, and then regulate the private rented sector as if it were the social sector. It's a very, very slippery slope. We mustn't forget that at the end of the day, if you own that property, you have a right to it back. You have a right to certain things, and regulation is being pushed very, very hard. But regulation is only good if those homes are there to regulate. And that's the thing to remember.
Absolutely. And I think in any big shift like this, it does create opportunity in some capacity.
Of course it does.
If renters feel more comfortable, then, there's
we don't want
be
voids, do we? We want people to stay.
Of course, yeah.
But it also, I think this type of, because we've had the threat of regulation like forever. It was the Tories that started us off on this journey as far back as 2019, with Theresa May announcing that they would abolish Section 21. Well, they never quite got around to it, but this lot have. We've lived. The sector has been living with that threat of regulation for some time, but as investors, we can diversify. We can do different things. We can either embrace what's coming, or we can go and we can do something different. Nobody's saying, it has to be a particular way. And I think that those that get ahead of the game, those that educate themselves, those that are looking at their portfolios and thinking very strategically around the longer term, will still do all right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. On that positive note, if people want to reach out, find out more information on NRLA, or they want to have a look at any of the resources that you guys have, how can they go about doing it?
Yeah, so nrla.org.uk, memberships, cheapest chips, £10 a month. Fantastic advice line, magazine, all the governance and documents that you need, some great partner discounts, training, accreditation, free software, discount on gas safeties and EICRs, the whole shebang. I'm probably massively underselling it, but of course, lobbying and speaking truth to power, which even if people are finding it difficult to listen to us, we're still going to go on. So make sure that your views are heard, and you can only do that with membership. We've got your back.
Amazing. And one message for landlords from yourself? Get
ahead of the game. Start planning now. Don't wait for these things to happen to you. Start planning.
Amazing. Thanks, Ben.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much for tuning in. Obviously a lot to unpick there from a Renters' Right Act. Make sure we get it right.
Got it right.
Not a bill anymore, it's an act. So make sure you're prepared, and hopefully you've had some value from today's episode. We'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.